Hi, I'm Andrew Rodriguez, and welcome to Psycho Bible, babbling about psychology and theology. And I'm delighted to have on the show today, or my channel today, a special guest, Christine Sneeringer. I'll let her give a little pitch about who she is because I've known her by many hats. She's done production work, she's recently wrote a book, she's done research, particularly on the transgender issue. I would love for her just to give a little brief spiel of who she is, introduce her to you guys, and then we'll get into her story. So, Christine, give a little rundown who you are and what you do.
Thank you, Andrew. Yes, I've been in ministry since 1999, speaking on sexual redemption themes. And that's because that's what God's rescued me out of. And I have written a book on this, Answers to Gender Madness. So I'm assuming we're going to talk about that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that behind you, you have the DVDs that I produced for my mentor in ministry, Cy Rogers, who was, I think, the world's greatest communicator,
Oh
certainly
yeah.
the best apologist on these issues, but also just a very gifted communicator, whether he's talking about sexuality or whether he's talking about, he did a goofy talk on, vampires and UFOs and things like that. But he was known for his work on sexual redemption. And I had the privilege of working with him for 20 years. So,
Yeah.
so I love
Yeah,
seeing that behind you.
that's one of the reasons I was eager to speak with you because I was hoping for some anecdotes about Psy. Uh, I had the privilege of meeting Psy back in 2012 when my wife and I started going to this church, and the pastor there he was a new pastor. He had come up from Florida, and when he heard about the work I do, because I was running a support group at my old college for guys dealing with sexual struggles, especially for guys with unwanted same-sex attraction, he's like, "Oh, I know Cy Rogers." We used to go to the same church in Florida. So Bob Levins was my pastor, and so he's like, I could fly him up and do a conference, a webinar with, or a whole seminar with him. So in 2012, he flew up both Cy and Karen, and so he did like a 3 day workshop at our church, and I was blessed. Me and my wife were able to go out for breakfast with Cy and Karen, and so he gifted me like his DVD collection, and so I started using those in my group that I ran for years. And so it was such a blessing to be able to meet with him. And I knew that you did production with him because I saw in some of the interviews you were the one interviewing him sometimes. I'm like, hey, I know her. And then I got to hear you speak in 2015 at the Restored Hope Network conference. You did some of your comedy there, the one in Lancaster, PA. So I was like, hey, I think I've seen her before. So thought it's great to see that connection with Cy. So we could probably talk about him a little bit at some point.
I heard him on Christian radio way back in the 80s. And then starting in Uh, probably 97 started my
Mm,
professional relationship with him. So when I got to be the director of a parachurch ministry here in South Florida that deals with sexual redemption and trying to help people who struggled with different things, whether that's unwanted same-sex attractions, sexual abuse, addiction to pornography. His resources were the ones that I gravitated toward just because I had been already a student of his for a number of years. I was discipled by Cy Rogers on cassette. That's how
mm,
old I am. So, and then I got to start working with him in 97 and became the producer. So all those resources behind you on the top shelf there, the lessons learned, I made all those, and
nice.
on the back of them has my little logo for Worthy Creations. That was an incredible privilege just to work with him.
Yeah.
And I'm very much um, a student of his work. And
Yeah. Uh, so you were a student of Cy Rogers, so this wasn't just you having an interest to help others, but it sounds like even his cassettes back at that time was even helping you. So this is more of a personal journey for you as well. Can you maybe share what your story is of sexual redemption?
absolutely, yeah, I didn't grow up saying I want the weirdest job I can have. I want to talk to people about sex for a living. But it's because of my own brokenness of having been raised in a home where there was domestic violence between my father to my mother and then my older brother to me, and this
Mm,
skewed my opinion and how I felt about being a female. First of all, I felt very unsafe because the two most important men in my life, my father and my brother, were the two most unsafe, unfortunately. And it also made me feel like men were could not be trusted. So
Mm,
for many years, I hated men just because I just felt like um, I had only ever seen them treat women as the object of their abuse or the victim of their abuse or the object of their lust. I hadn't seen
yeah.
some really kind, loving interactions between men and women growing up. And so I just thought that I painted men with a broad brush. And when you do that, for me, then homosexuality became the only safe option in relationship for me because
Mm,
if men aren't safe, you see what I'm saying? And I'm not trying to
yeah.
justify it because I know what the Bible condemns homosexuality in the Old as well as the New Testament. So I'm not trying to justify it and make it sound like it's okay, but I am saying that, and this is what Cy Rogers used to say for years, that it makes it understandable, but it's also correctable and forgivable. So
Yeah.
my homosexuality came out of trauma, and so my healing journey was very much looking at what set me up to believe, have these false beliefs about men and even about my own gender. And it was a
Mm,
process of embracing who God made me to be, as well as seeing men in a whole new way. But that only came as a result of healthy relationships with men. And that was thankfully that happened as a result of becoming a Christian and as a young adult and meeting men in church who treated me with dignity and respect. And so that helped me, and having those relationships freed me to embrace my gender finally, because
mm,
femininity made me feel vulnerable. And so I didn't want to
mm.
be vulnerable because in my experience, vulnerability equaled weakness because my vulnerabilities were being exploited as a child. So now as an adult, finally being around safe men allowed me to express myself in feminine ways. I don't know if that makes sense, but I hope it
Oh yeah,
kind of
yeah.
does it.
Of
Yeah.
course.
Yeah.
Um, so prior to coming to Christ, was your upbringing religious in any way? Was your family going to church despite not living right? Not many of your father and brother not living for God, but did you have any sort of Christianity exposure prior to you making that commitment in your young adulthood?
I did, and it wasn't very helpful because my
Mm,
dad is the one who proclaimed faith in the 70s. He said he became a Christian. Not like he didn't like tell me that as a child, but I just know that all of a sudden we started going to church. And then as I
mm,
got a little older, I realized he said, "Oh, I found God or Christ, back in the 70s." But the problem with that, and the reason why it was not helpful to me, is that he still treated my mom, he still abused her.
yeah.
And so now he's a Christian and he's abusing my mother and he's abusive to my whole family because he was also verbally abusive and had an anger problem. He also was addicted to pornography, and I was aware of that. I couldn't have
Mm,
called it addiction, but I knew there were stacks of magazines, and he was an alcoholic. So there was a lot of behavior that didn't line up with the faith. So I thought that how he treated my mom was okay with God because my dad's dragging us to church every week.
yeah.
So then what it did was it made me not interested in God because if God's okay with a man hitting his wife, I'm not okay with God.
Hmm.
And it wasn't until years later when I came to faith, and it wasn't even a result of me looking for God. And I love that I serve a God who will leave the 99, and that's in the Bible where it talks about God is a good shepherd. He leaves the 99, meaning the sheep, to go after the one lost sheep. And he left, whoever to come looking for me because I didn't know any better to go looking for him. I didn't want him because
Hmm.
I thought that, he was okay with what was happening in my family, and I was not okay with it. I'm not okay with domestic violence. I'm not okay with sexual abuse, which is also something I experienced growing up. So I'm not okay with these things for being exploited and discarded and abused. And I realize now, and I realized as a young adult, as I got to know God and his character, he wasn't okay with it either. And so,
Hmm.
but sometimes our pain keeps us from pursuing God because we think that he's indifferent to it. And he's not indifferent to our pain. And I didn't know that at the time.
Yeah. So how did you come to know what God's heart really was? Like, how did he break through that barrier that you would have had there?
Yeah, it was a pretty big barrier. First of all, I got around Christians on a regular basis. And for me, it was a kind of unusual context. It was
Hmm.
in through sports, because that's something it's always been a through line in my life. I've loved sports. My favorite sport is tennis. I don't know if you can see my little tennis racket around my neck, but
That is okay.
yeah. So that's my favorite. But I loved other sports as well. And like I played Little League baseball as a child, and I was the only girl on my team because he didn't have a girls' team. So it was the reverse of what we're seeing today, where you have a boy playing on a girls' team. I was a girl playing on a boys' team, and I did not have a competitive advantage, although I
Hmm.
was good and I could hold my own. But anyway, and so as a young adult, I found myself playing on a church softball team when I was not a Christian and when I was in a gay relationship. So it was
Okay.
kind of an unusual place to find a lesbian, playing softball with Baptists, but that's what happened.
Well, how'd you get on the church softball team? You weren't a Christian yet? Were you going to a
No,
church, but you're
I
undercover
wasn't
or something?
I wasn't going to the church. I just knew somebody on the team. And I remember going to
Okay.
her game and saying, I want to play. And she said, well, you have to join the church. I said, well, I'm not joining the church. But then I ended up talking to the coach, and he was open to letting me play. You know what he said? He said, you have to be loyal to this church. And I remember thinking, well, I don't go to any other churches, which would be the competition. So that's how I'm loyal. And so he let me play ball with them. And through that, that's what got me around Christians on a regular basis. I didn't
Mm.
know that I was kind of messing this whole thing up for them, because they were a church team. They were playing in a city league, and they wanted to be light in a dark world. It's like they were the only Christian team in this league. And then here I was in the outfit, and I was super competitive. Like I wanted to win. So we would, before the game, we would pray. And it used to frustrate me that we never prayed to win. And because that was my only prayer, was like, I want to win. Yeah. And then when something went wrong on the field, like let's say the ball got past the shortstop, I would be the one in the outfield throwing my glove and swearing on the field. Meanwhile, my jersey said, say yes to Jesus, because that was our uniform. And my teammates were confused, and rightly so. And they also complained to the coach about me. I always joke that we call that prayer requests. And
Yeah.
yeah,
God,
so
help us with our language.
yeah. Well, no, they just said they said she's cussing in the outfield. And he said, you see that girl, you pray for that girl. So,
Mm.
so God bless him that he let me hang around, because some people might not have been able to handle that. I mean, they wanted to
Hmm.
be light in a dark world in this league, and they had this darkness, me in the outfield. So, but the cool thing is that they just continued to love me and pray for me, and it was over time. It was over 3 long seasons. So we're talking 18 months of me ruining their witness. So I got to see them live their life in front of me, and our team was run very much like a home fellowship. So we prayed
Wow.
before the game, and then after the game, we met again. And this was a different kind of thing where people would share personal needs. The coach would say, does anybody have any prayer requests? So people would share personal needs. Then we'd pray, and then we'd leave. I never had a prayer request. I didn't even care, but I was just like, I'll wait till we're done. And, but that was like, that's body ministry. Like we're going to
Yeah.
be in it with each other. And what I noticed was the difference between this group of people that would pray for each other's needs. Because you come back the next week and somebody would say, hey, I've been praying for you this week about that thing you shared. You were looking for a job, or your
Mm.
husband's surgery, or whatever the thing they asked for prayer for. I would hear them check in with each other, because that's how a lot of Christians operate. Is like, we're family. In the body of Christ, we consider each other brothers and sisters in Christ. And so I'm standing in the gap for my family member, praying for this need that they have. And so they would check in about that need. And I was like, oh yeah, she did say that. Like I never prayed for anybody. I never had a prayer request. I was like, I don't care. I knew what I needed to be happy. I was in a gay relationship. I was fine. I was just there to play ball. But I'll tell you this, God had other ideas.
Yeah. You think you ruined their witness to the other teens, but you couldn't ruin their witness toward you. God was th-
Good point.
that team was there for you. They were there to be witnesses to you, and that's what God was using. So
100%. It was basically a conspiracy, and I had no idea.
so what eventually happened?
Well, over the 18 months of playing ball with them, I noticed they were very different than my friends at university. I was finishing up a degree at the University of Tampa, and what I noticed was the contrast between this family of faith that loved each other, that prayed for each other for their challenges in life, And the people that I went to school with that were my friends, but they were what I call fair weather friends, which are
Mm.
people who are there for you when things are going well, but they're not necessarily there for you when you're having a hard time, there to encourage you and help you out of a mess or whatever. And so I was like, I saw the contrast. And there's a song from, I don't know what decade it's from. I think it was from the 70s. I'm not 100% sure, but it says, "They'll know we are Christians by our love." And that's really what our is meant to be our testimony as believers, is that the lost and dying world will be able to know there's something different about us, and they'll know. And that's the love of God that we have for each other as well as for them, for the lost and dying world. I didn't know any of that. I just knew there was something very attractive about this group of people who were more than fair weather friends. They were
Mm.
fair and foul weather friends. You want a friend to be there with you, not just when things are great, but when things are not going well. That's when you really need a friend. And I saw that they were doing that, and I was attracted to their character. And I didn't understand like what was going on. I just said, I want people like that in my life, and I
Mm.
want to be like that. And then I thought, how do you get like that? I said, I don't know, but I'm just going to get involved. So I went to church once in a while, got there late, left early, and it was never my church. I was just there to play ball. But then when I decided these are the kind of people I want in my life, and this is the kind of person I want to be,
Mm.
then I started going to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, Sunday school, everything I could go to, home fellowship, because I was trying to understand what it is that's driving them. And I wanted whatever it was they had. And turns out it was a relationship with God through Jesus Christ that was making them the kind of people they were. And then I became a Christian as well in 1989. And in the immortal words of Cy Rogers, I wish I could say that at that time when I became a Christian, that God waved a magic wand over me and said, 1, 2, 3, now you're free. Go be straight, date, and mate. But you and I both
Yeah.
know it didn't work that way.
Yeah.
My sin
No.
nature was still intact, and I still had this orientation, my sexual orientation, and these same-sex attractions. But now I was aligning myself with God to go through life together. And then I heard Cy on Christian radio
Hmm.
talking about these kind of things. It was a call-in show. I'd actually heard him 2 years before. So I heard him before I ever became a Christian, but I didn't
Really?
like him then because he's talking about me. He's talking about
Yeah.
my sin. And I'm like, I don't see it as sin. I just see it as this is who I am. I thought I was born this way.
Mm.
Then fast forward, I become a Christian and I realize this is not what God has for me, or doesn't have this for anybody. Like it's outside the boundaries. And I'm not picking on gay people. I mean, there's lots of ways we fall short of God's standard. This just happened to be the way that I went outside the boundaries. And so then I heard him again, like I said, as a new Christian. And I was very much captivated by him as a communicator and what he was saying. And I went to go hear him speak live a few months later. He was doing a seminar in Orlando. And I could tell you the date because it was just one of those defining
Mm.
moments. It was March 31st, 1990. He taught a seminar and I went to it. And it filled me with hope that if God could help him, God could help anybody. And so then that started me on a trajectory of being able to, it didn't fix everything, but it gave me the hope to know that I could put my trust in God, that I don't have to fix myself to be good enough for God because I'm never going to be able to do that, but that He's with me in this journey. And
Mm.
it was a process, all of it. I'm not even talking about a process regarding my same-sex attraction, but we call it the sanctification process in Christianese, which is basically the process where we're surrendering our lives to God and conforming our character to be more like Him, the Christ-like character that we want as believers.
Yeah.
So, embracing God's truths and doing our best to live them out. And then when we fail, to keep going back to Him, saying, "Look, I need help because I'm blowing it here, I'm blowing it there. I still get mad in traffic or whatever. I do these things. I yell, I scream, or I'm not kind. Or I told a lie. Whatever it is we're doing, but still taking that kind of like that moral inventory and
Mm.
always being in a process of surrendering ourselves and we could say our carnal nature to God, for sanctification, to grow in my ability and not in my ability, but just to be transformed We talk about in the Bible, in the church, renewing our mind and having a mind that's more like Christ. He was full of love and grace and mercy and also truth, though. So that's been a journey. And it's also a journey
Yeah.
to embrace the body that God gave me, because that was a big part of my journey out of homosexuality, was recognizing that God made me female, that I wanted to be a boy because I wanted to be safe. Thankfully, he put wonderful Christian men in my life who
Hmm.
treated me with dignity and respect. And that freed me to finally be able to embrace my gender, because I felt my femininity made me feel vulnerable.
Yeah.
And I thought it would make me open to abuse, like the kind of experience I had growing up. But I realized, yeah, okay, so my father and my brother were not safe, but doesn't mean that all men are not. And so I had
Yeah.
to learn that there are some that are trustworthy and kind and helpful. And I was grateful to learn that. And then I began to embrace who God made me to be instead of trying to reject it.
Yeah. There's a couple things I want to just highlight. One that really stands out is it took a period of you being exposed to the church, and I praise God that these were people who obviously they had flaws. Like these weren't like a bunch of saints who are so perfect and never made any mistakes, but they at least were good enough representatives of
Yeah,
Christ and his heart that it could counteract and disconfirm the old expectations you had about church and about Christians because of how much you were exposed to hypocrisy with your dad claiming to be a Christian yet being abusive.
right.
And so this contradicted that old experience. That was so important that you were immersed in an experience that really contradicted what you had grown up with seeing. So
100%.
that was so important that God facilitated that. Uh,
Yes,
and it shows just how important it is for us as believers to always be mindful, like, hey, am I growing in my walk? Because I don't know in what way I'll be a witness to someone else, at what part I'm playing in someone else's story. Like each person in that softball team had a role to in being a good witness to you, and they didn't even realize it.
right.
How
I didn't either, for sure.
so that's it's like this just shows how much the responsibility is on each of us as
Hmm.
Christians to be working on our own walk with God, our own sanctification, because it's not just about you. God, God is He has a network of people that your life is touching without you even
Yes.
realizing.
Yes. Basically, what you're describing is God is wants to reflect his character to us through his people. And
Hmm.
you asked me earlier, what was it? How did you realize that how God is? And it's through his people. Most often I find that, I
Yeah.
mean, I can read the Bible and I can read words on a page, but it doesn't come to life as well as it does. I mean, I don't want to minimize the importance of the word of God, but experiencing God's love through people was a different experience than just reading stories about his love. I got to
Yeah.
feel his love as it was mediated through the people around me, and I got to taste something very different than I'd ever experienced before, and that I wanted more of.
Yeah. The other thing I want to bring up, and you mentioned this in your book, the experience of being a tomboy. So you've
Oh,
always been into
yes.
sports, and um, I'm not sure how you felt about this, but the word tomboy always bothered me as a kid. Like growing up, when you
Okay.
hear girls being referred to as tomboys, like why the word we use to describe girls who just are into more masculine activities, why are we then calling them a boy? And now we're talking about tomboys. Like tomboys have disappeared because now the trans cult has captured them and convinced them to become boys. But we
Yeah.
kind of set it up already with the very terminology we're using, calling girls tomboy instead of just
Yes.
some other word that says they're a girl who likes typically masculine activities. So it always bothered me that that's a word that we use to describe a type of female. And I'm not sure what sense you had, but was there a sense of ownership or pride? I'm a tomboy, or was there a sense of shame about it? What was the experience for you?
Yeah, I would say it was not a sense of, I didn't have a pride in being a tomboy, because when that word was being used, it was derogatory.
Mm,
It wasn't like, it wasn't a positive, it was a label that meant you don't measure up to what a female is,
Yeah.
you're falling short. And you're right. So it is saying you're more like a boy than like a girl. And now I can appreciate the word because I feel like there's no one right way to be a woman. Like, because I
Hmm.
was born a woman, I'm a woman. So whether I like sports or whether I like to play with dolls, I'm still a female. That shouldn't be a reflection of how female I am, because the female part has been settled. So there are women who like, or let's say girls who grow up playing with dolls, like my younger sister. We're very different. She was what I call foo-foo, like super feminine, right? And I'm the opposite. I'm the tomboy that people often called me sir, son, or young man growing up. Like they didn't even know
Yeah.
I was a girl. I didn't look like a girl. So now I would say I wish that we would bring the word back, even though you and I are discussing that it wasn't that helpful at the time. But I would rather see a girl be a tomboy than try to change to be a boy,
Yeah.
because she's getting a message that you're not atypical in your gender, so you must be in the wrong body. And that is not a correct message.
Yeah. Yeah. So we've taken all of this is based on these stereotypes. And so if a girl doesn't fit the stereotype for a girl, she's a tomboy. And now we've taken that stereotype and the trans ideology says, oh, well, then that means you're not just a girl who's like a boy, you are a boy.
Right. You're in the
And
wrong body. Yes.
so the whole gender ideology is t entirely rooted in stereotypes. And so it really brings a problem that I have with our very narrow definitions of what it means to be a boy and what it means to be a girl. That, I often say when I'm interviewed that I grew up in a church that worshiped God and football. And if you were a guy who wasn't into football, like there's something wrong with you. Like what's up with you? Like, and it's like there's not enough of a broader understanding of what masculinity is, that there's
Yes.
different
Yes.
archetypes for masculine,
Right.
just as there's different archetypes for femininity. And so like one of the things you were saying in the book that was really helpful for you with, because you're growing up being the Little League team, the only girl, the token girl in these different sports teams, but then being in that church softball team, you saw, oh, there are other women who like to play sports as well, and they're still feminine. They're still embracing their femininity.
Well, and I tell you what shocked me about that was not just that they played sports, but there was one particular girl who I would say was one of the most feminine looking girls, who was one of the best athletes on the team. And that was
Mm,
very surprising to me, because here I was, a girl who looks like a boy who was a great athlete,
mm,
but I had not seen a woman who looked like a woman who could play ball. Let's just put it that way. Like, you know what I'm saying?
hmm.
Like, I would
Sure.
judge a feminine woman going, ah, you're not going to be that good, you know?
Yeah, she's gonna throw like a
Um,
girl.
yeah, yeah, right, exactly.
Judge her like
Yes,
that.
yes, exactly. So,
But yeah,
yeah.
so that counteracted that, and like, huh? So that ties into what you just said earlier. There's no wrong way to be a girl or to be a
Right.
woman.
You
That
just
it's all.
are a girl. You're just female. That's it. It's a biological reality. It's not anything you have to do. So whether I'm wearing Levi's or a bridesmaid's gown, I'm still female, and I'm not less female because I'm in jeans. Do you know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. That's why I actually resent when people use terms like trans women versus biological women, and I'm like, is there any other type of woman?
Than a
Like,
biological woman. Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
like
because a trans woman though is not a woman, it's a man.
yeah.
So I
So
learned
when
this from a podcast. Let me tell you this, and see if this helps you, because it helped me. I heard a guy say this: whenever you hear trans man or trans woman, substitute the word fake for trans. So it's a fake man or a fake woman. So if I say a trans woman, that's a fake woman, which means it's a man.
I literally said that on Twitter or X the other day.
Did you?
Yeah, I literally said something like instead of using biological woman or biological man, it's real or pretending or fake. So
Okay,
that
yeah,
was my
yeah.
comment
That's it. That's
because
it.
like I don't we're ceding territory the more we use these qualifiers. Well, you're a biological woman. No, no, you're a woman. Just simple as that. And the reality is your womanness or maleness or manness or whatever is
Femaleness, maleness,
based
yeah.
is based in embodiment. Like we can't
Right.
separate it. It's it's a Gnostic heresy that is running through our culture and has infiltrated the church as well when we start using this terminology. To think
Yeah.
that your true essence, your true self, is somehow unrelated to your body. That's no, as humans, we're unique in that we are body spirit composites. We're fused together. It's
Mm,
intrinsic to your body what your
yeah.
identity is.
Yeah. And it's weird though too though when you see some people being some talking about on television about these kind of things and they're trying to argue that a trans woman is a real woman and it's not. And so that's why I think it's important. I mean, they firmly believe that, you know. Um
Yeah.
and yeah, it's not a biological woman. And then they talk about men can have babies because that's a really a biological female who pretends to be a man and that person can have a baby
And it just
because they have the equipment for
confuses.
it. It
Uh,
it's yeah.
can like poor kids these days, they're still trying
Yeah.
to figure out how to navigate the world, how to discern uh what people are, and when people use these terms, well that's the that's part of the goal. It's not a bug, it's a feature of this whole thing, is to confuse our sense-making capabilities so we
Yeah.
can't discern reality, we can't discern what the truth is.
Yeah, it
Uh,
does confuse children. That's why I'm really passionate about the issue of gender and the gender confusion or every whatever you want to call it. Because I do think it's madness that that grown people and even like, you know, some politicians want to argue that men can have babies. They're getting rid of words like mothers, calling them birthing persons. Have you heard that yet?
oh yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, all that kind of
Or
stuff.
uterus havers, yeah, uterus possessing people like that. They've come with this most bungled language to really dehumanize and reduce us down to certain parts instead of recognizing there's a totality that's being represented by what a woman is. So uterus is certainly part of it, but that makes her a woman. Having the
Yeah,
uterus makes her. You don't have to use some other qualifier. It's
yeah. So they want to
crazy.
argue that gender is a social construct and that,
Hmm.
and even sometimes they want to argue that biological sex is also a social construct. It's
Yeah.
insane.
So it's interesting. Your background was more of the same sex attraction. You didn't go down the transgender route, though. You had a lot of this enmity with your femininity or your femaleness.
Well, there's a
Uh,
reason I didn't go down that track, and that's because it wasn't popular then, because I would have
yes.
gone down that track. If you put me, everything that I'd experienced, and you just fast forward, you know, a few decades and put me into today as a teenager with my history, I would have already had my mastectomy. I'd have my testosterone shots.
Hmm.
In fact, I'd, you know, have the surgery to make a fake penis because there was nothing I wanted more than to be a boy. I'm just grateful that I grew up in a time where I did not have access to these things because I know people who've done these kind of things to their body and they have deep regrets. I know that, I mean, I'm not saying that everybody who's done it regrets it. I do think we are going to see a tsunami of regret in young people as they wake up to this reality that what have I done? And I've done
Hmm.
permanent damage to my body. And these things you cut off, you're not getting back.
No.
Or even the hormones that make your voice deeper if you're a girl trying to be a boy, like when you go off of that and you're now trying to embrace your own biological reality, which is your female body, you're still going to have this deep voice.
Yeah, that's one of the least reversible effects. I know one person who it reversed a bit, and that was Laura Perry.
Oh,
So
okay. I didn't know that it.
yeah,
Okay.
hers reversed enough. It might not have been too deep to begin with. She might have stopped it soon enough, but most of the time at the stores I hear, they have the voice still. It might be a little crackly, like a boy in puberty sounding, but it doesn't go back to sounding as the way it did before all that changed.
Yeah. So I'm
And
just
so,
grateful I didn't have the access that the kids have access to today to that kind of stuff. And they even
yeah.
can do it sadly in some places without parental consent. They can obtain these treatments.
Oh yeah, it's like they're literally on a mission to trans as many kids as they can. When you see it, it's they don't hesitate. Um, and we can get into it a bit because with your book you get into with WPATH and their recommendations with the
Yeah.
that led to the standards of care. It's a complete uh, there's like no guidelines essentially.
Right. They lowered they took out any minimum age restrictions on children having puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones. And so that means it doesn't matter what age they can be prescribed these things. And it's like we need to let kids grow up without any of this pressure and then let them be adults. And then if they want to start messing around with that, that's a whole different thing than a child who does not have the critical thinking skills to push back against the ideology.
Yeah, I'm a little more hardcore. I don't think it should be allowed for adults either, just
I
because
mean, I'm
I
not a
think.
fan for adults, but I you know, I'm not a
Well,
fan either
simply because I
way.
think medicine should be to correct people to better align with reality, to correct things that are wrong, not to be used to suit your whims. And so,
Yeah, that makes
so
sense.
but anyway, yeah. So you had this book. It's a pretty short book, but you can tell there's
Yeah.
a lot of good research went into it.
Yeah.
It's a really basically a good Q&A book right there on
It's
the
a good
cover.
the bibliography is amazing because I
Yeah,
mean
like I was just looking at
I
the end, like that's a whole lot of references you got there at
I
the end.
did a lot of research to answer these questions. I did not want to just say, oh, this is my opinion. I wanted, you know what I wanted is for people to know where they could get more information from a reliable, trustworthy, factual source that's rooted in biological reality, not in ideology. So those are the people that I wanted to quote so that parents who might be reading this or caregivers who need more information. It's really meant to be a biblical and also practical resource, as well as it's rooted in psychology. So it's a
Yeah.
combination of, I'm drawing on all these forums to compose the answers, not just, just 100% theological, but let's talk about the psychology behind it and things like that.
Yeah. So what went into your just a process of doing all the research? What was the journey like just doing all this?
Well, I mean, it was it would have gone faster, except I would find sources, and then I would go on Amazon, and you can read a sample of a book on Amazon. So I
Hmm.
was trying to read as much as I could for free, and then I realized like what I want to see is in chapter 4, and they only let you see usually chapter 1.
Hmm.
And so I ended up had to spend a ton of money on all the books to be able to get to the part that I wanted. So
Oh yeah.
it was slower than I wanted to until I realized I'm just gonna have to bite the bullet and buy these books because what I want to see is buried in there. It's not all in chapter 1. But yeah, just reading, taking a particular question and reading as much as I can, and then also letting the experts speak as well because I wanted to it's not all based on my opinion because we got like psychologists and theologians and pastors. I'm quoting from these sources who, they've studied the Bible longer than me, or psychologists who have their credentials and been in private practice. I mean, Miriam Grossman is somebody that I quoted a lot from. I really
Yeah.
respect her work. There's just a number of different experts that I'm using. And then my favorite chapter though is chapter 3, which is the one about the do's and don'ts of
Yeah.
parental support.
Which is that's something one I wanted to hone in on. So when I said that's one of the chapters I wanted to discuss with you, I'm glad that that's your favorite, because that is the most common question I get. Most of the time, I'm not getting as a therapist. I'm not getting as many people struggling with their gender identity and dysphoria contacting me. I'm getting the parents reaching out to
Right.
me,
Exactly.
and so I've done some counseling with parents, and a lot of times it's like they're they're struggling to figure out what can we do, who can we talk to. So can we walk through some of those do's and don'ts, some of the main
Yes.
highlights from there?
And when I started writing this book, that chapter didn't exist. There was a question of my daughter says she's a boy, what should I do?
Hmm.
And when I wrote the answer to that, because every other chapter is multiple questions, but when I wrote that answer, it was longer than all the other answers. And then I thought I was trying to, I was trying to make the chapters about the same length and the questions about the same length, but that particular answer was so much longer that I sent it to a friend who writes for a ministry, and I said, "Hey, can you tell me where you would cut this?" Because I was like, I want to make it as short as all the other answers. And he read it and said, I wouldn't cut it. And I was like, well, that's not helpful because this chapter is going to be so much longer than the other ones. And so then instead of cutting it, what I did was took all of what I wrote and found practical takeaways that I could just it's just it doesn't fit in terms of all the other chapters are just question, 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 question. Then all of a sudden you have this
Yep.
one chapter that says, do this, don't do that. And that was inspired by a book that says, eat this, don't eat that. I don't know if you've ever
Yeah,
seen that.
yeah, yep.
Yeah, that was inspired by that. So, and I took a couple of stories, real life examples from women whose daughters actually were being transitioned by their schools. And that these
Mm-hmm.
moms, when they found out, and I heard interviews with them. I actually had met these women, and I took their story, listened to several versions of their story, and just extrapolated these do's and don'ts. And I looked at other resources as well. But so I told it through the eyes of people who've already been on this journey and what would be most helpful. So the first one is do pray and don't panic. Because obviously, whenever we panic, no matter what it is, we're not going to be that helpful because as a therapist, you know, you're not in your prefrontal cortex. And so
Hmm.
you're not making rational decisions when you're panicking.
Yep.
You're not making good decisions. So, for example, one of the most famous detransitioners in our country, Chloe Cole,
Hmm.
when she told her parents that she was questioning and she thought she might be a boy, and they took her to a therapist, the therapist, so when she told them this, that's when they panic. Is like, oh, we want to get you help. So then we take you to a professional. Well, the
Hmm.
professional says, and sadly, so much of the mental health community has been co opted by the gender ideology. So the professional tells the parents, oh, well, then if she thinks she's a boy, she must be one. So you got to start calling her by these pronouns. And she picked a masculine name so that immediately we're going to socially transition her and then go get a referral to get on hormones or that kind of thing. So that's what I mean by I don't even think you should, and it might be counterintuitive to say sending your child to a therapist is a form of panicking, but I think you want to slow it down if your
Yeah.
child is questioning these things, and certainly pray if that's your worldview. It is mine and yours, but
You got to do a lot of research before you send a kid to a therapist, any
right, you
therapist
got to
these
know
days.
who they're talking to. You don't just look up on your insurance and go, oh, he takes my insurance. No, because you might be sending them to somebody who's like gonna just lead them right down a path to destruction, to self mutilation, and so you don't want
Yeah.
that. So I say don't panic. The next one is improve your communication with your child. Don't just dismiss their feelings. So if your child is like, oh, I feel like I'm a boy, you don't go, don't be ridiculous, of course you're a girl, because now you've just told that child you're not safe for them to confide in, because you're
Hmm.
just dismissing them. And so you want to go, oh, what makes you think that?
Yeah.
Why do you feel this way? What is it you don't like about your body?
Yep.
Start to ask questions without judgment, because that's, you're a therapist. That's
Yep.
how is somebody going to open up to you? You have to be able to create a space for them to feel free enough and safe enough to share things, and that they're not going to feel judged for sharing those things. So
Yep.
you want to improve your communication with your child, and you want them to see you as their ally. And I use that word. I probably shouldn't have chosen that word because that word has also been co-opted.
Well, you also mentioned that later in one of the later
Yeah, it is
chapters.
one of the
Should I be an ally?
answers.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so then seek encouragement from other parents. Don't suffer alone. So there's lots of ministries that, and they're not all, when I say ministries, it may not even be all Christian, but there's parents groups out there. They may not be in person. They could be on Zoom. So I have a friend, I'm in South Florida. I have a friend who leads a group for parents, and they meet on Zoom.
Hmm.
And because what the problem is, you feel like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what to say. I don't want to do the wrong thing. And I'm here saying, don't panic, but don't rush into take your child to a therapist. So like, but listen to other parents, see what they've done, just to encouragement to know you're not alone. Because I think when we're
Yeah.
suffering alone is that can be depressing, discouraging. So you want to build community. You want a community that's going to support you through this.
And that's one that's obvious to us as helpers, but I found that advice is one of the hardest ones for the parents to accept when I've spoken with parents. I've had some clients I've worked with who their daughter, they found out that she was transitioning at school, and so
Hmm.
the parents were working with me, another therapist was working with the daughter, and they were just so ashamed that this was happening to their daughter that they kept it to themselves. They didn't tell any of their family members. They were they were nominal Christians at the
Yeah.
time. This made them more active as Christians, but still at the church they were scared to tell anyone. And I kept encouraging them. There's online support groups. I gave them names to ones, and they're like, "What's the point of going to that? What, just so I hear the other parents complain?" It was just they were so resistant to the idea. They would not take like any of my advice. It was so, but I would see them like. just get worse and worse. They were getting so much more anxious and depressed, and they were miserable because they like, you guys need support, and you're
Yeah.
looking at me, every week or every other week. Like,
Yeah.
it's not enough for me to just empathize with you guys. Um, you guys need more people in your corner. It was so tough. Some people
Did
did
you,
it. Yeah,
I was gonna say,
go
did you ever get them to go?
No, it was tough. There was a tough case. I've other parents uh, who they would have select few people that they would talk to, and I'm like, better than no one.
Right?
Others where they would just be like, we gotta hide it from the rest of the family. If the rest of the family knows about this, they're terrified about the family knowing. Like, your son is coming out. They're gonna find out.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
you can't just avoid this. He's clearly dressing like a girl. He's being very out there. The other family members are going to notice. You might as well just talk about it. Like,
Right. This is the
face the
elephant
thing
in
you're
the
scared
room.
of.
Yeah.
So I've had so many cases where they are just terrified because they're so ashamed, thinking that this means they failed as a parent.
Yep, they do think it. Many times parents think it's a reflection of their parenting. Absolutely. So that's why I think it is important to hear from other parents because that shame will keep you isolated and
Hmm.
it's miserable. And so the next one is do get educated, don't affirm. By that I mean
Yeah.
affirm like because the medical community calls it gender affirming care, and that means we're going to affirm who the child says they are. So if it's a boy who thinks he's a girl, we're going to affirm that. And I say no, don't affirm that because you're affirming a delusion. You're
Yeah.
affirming something that's not true. You're affirming that something that's not rooted in biological reality. But get educated about this stuff. Get a book like mine or another book. I mean, I don't care what book it is. Go look at the bibliography and find those books. I don't care, but you need help because there's a lot of misinformation on this issue. And I don't know, you could really regret it if you take the advice of people that are going to lead your children off a cliff to
Yeah.
harming their bodies permanently. And you mentioned Laura Perry because I quote
Hmm.
her in this book, and she talked
Yeah.
about how her mom would never use her male name and
Hmm.
how like her mom just stood firm instead of like some of these parents want to be progressive and be like, okay, that's good, and I mean there's some
Yeah.
parents who are super proud of trans kids and proud that they have a trans kid because somehow I don't know, that makes them, because having an oppressed minority, gives you more, that whole
Oh yeah.
victim
It's
status thing.
yeah. They got we have a name now for it. Is it Transhausen by proxy, or 'cause
Oh,
taking the Munchausen by
yep.
proxy diagnosis. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
so they, especially the moms, are really vulnerable to this, feeling like it's like a virtue to be the mother of a trans or non-binary child. So, but I've watched a lot, especially on Benjamin Boyce's channel.
I
He does
like him.
a lot of interviews with detransitioners, and one of the most consistent things I've heard from those stories is having a parent who did not affirm, but
Hmm.
they were also very loving still. So they weren't just like harsh and just outright
Right.
rejecting. So when you can maintain that contact while still, nope, this is your name. I gave you this name. I thought a lot about this name I gave you. I know you're a girl. I'm not going to use these pronouns. And they might be ticked off at their parents and cut them off for a period of time, but when they had their conviction and they came to a realization that this is not who they really were. It was the parent who didn't lie to them that they knew they could go
Yeah.
back to and they could trust that parent, not
Yeah.
all the other
But
people
here's
who went along with it.
I agree. And Erin Friday talks about that, about you have to be prepared to be hated by your child. She's one of the women in my book that I talk about. I unpack her story. And so they didn't go along with it, but they had firm boundaries. I mean, and we're talking, you have to look at what age the child is, how much you can do, because if you have a 15, 16-year-old, they're still in your home, they're still in school, they're still a dependent on you, versus you have a 20-something-year-old who doesn't live with you anymore. There's different things you can do, but Aaron says if you've got somebody younger who's a minor who's still under your care, you have time, but you need to act quickly
Yeah.
because the other thing we're seeing is now these kids are being told when they're old enough and they're an adult to do no contact, to sever
Yeah.
the relationship with their parent, because if you don't support me in my gender transition, then you're toxic. So I just wanted to make the distinction of how old
Hmm.
the child is depends on how much you can control. And so Aaron Friday took her child's phone away. And now we're seeing research come out about children should not have smartphones, period.
Oh, heck no. Yeah.
Like
I say most
Jonathan,
of this would go away if people did. Yeah, Jonathan Haidt's research is really good on
yeah,
this.
yeah, this he wrote
Um,
that book, The Anxious Generation, and I think he
yep.
says no smartphone before I think 16,
That's what I would say.
and no
Yep.
social media either, because a lot of this is driven by social contagion and through their social network and online. So take away their access to that stuff, and because you're trying to ground them back into reality versus all
Yep.
these ideas. So but Aaron Friday had to be like not afraid for her daughter to hate her for a season
Yes.
while she was trying to steer her daughter back to the reality that she's a female.
Yeah.
And
And
then eventually the daughter did come out of it, like you called it, like a trans cult, because it's almost like these kids, their minds are hijacked.
mhm.
And then her daughter thanked her, but there was a point where they were kind of enemies for a while, you know?
Yeah. It's just if we were to apply this to any other issue, like as Christian, especially as Christians, I mean, we are seeing this be a major epidemic among more liberal parents, and they're waking up to this stuff. Um, so maybe they weren't so prepared to be hated, but as Christians, just in general, you should be prepared to be hated.
Yes.
And so if you're not, then you're going to be very vulnerable to being taken over by this ideology when it hits home in some way.
Yeah.
We've seen this happen with the homosexuality issue. How many pastors suddenly change their stance on what the Bible says about homosexuality and gay marriage because they had a loved one who came out as gay and entered into a gay marriage? Suddenly they're
Hmm.
rethinking their theology. It's like, no, you weren't ready to carry your cross and stand your ground and be hated, and so you compromise. And the parents who care more about being best friends with their kid, or they're worried more
Mm,
about how painful it is when their kids hate them, they're the ones
hmm.
who are going to cave and they're going to cater to their child, and end up doing more harm eventually by going along with what their child wants.
Yes, that's one of the points actually I made was set firm boundaries with your child and don't put the friendship with your child above your parental authority. So like
Mhm.
you're the parent, be the parent instead of like I want you to like me and so I'm going to acquiesce to your and that's kind of ruined a generation where parents have let the children be in the driver's seat, and these kids now, I mean, I'm not saying all kids, but I'm saying we have a generation that doesn't have any
Oh yeah.
resilience because parents have wanted to make them so comfortable and not let them go through any kind of, I would say pain, but I'm saying like where they don't get their way. Because to a child, if I don't get my way, that's pain, but that's not pain. Do you know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah. Talking about Jonathan Haidt, that came up in his book with Greg Lukianoff, The Coddling
Is
of the
it
American Mind.
the coddling of the
Yeah,
American mind? Yes.
definitely. And yeah, you in family therapy terms, this is one of the main family systems theorists would call that an upside down hierarchy, when
Okay.
the children runs the household. When
Okay.
everyone's,
Yeah.
they're bending over backwards to make sure the child gets their way and that they're comfortable and they get what they want. It's like, nope, there has to be a triple down effect. Mom and dad are first,
Yeah.
and then it goes down to them. It'll work out. Like, make sure your marriage is good. That's another point I would add too. Um, there's one family I was working with, and they came to me because their son came out as trans, and I'm like, okay. And then I started working with them like, you guys aren't on the same page as this issue. Both of you guys have different ways you want to approach this. So like, you guys need to come together on this. And as we started working on that, realized you guys, your marriage needs a lot of help. You're worried
Yeah.
about your son, but you're scapegoating your son. You guys need to work on your marriages.
Oh,
And there was some really deep-rooted issues in their marriage, and they weren't willing to work on it. And I'm like, this is going to have a major effect. Why do you think your son was so vulnerable to this when you guys have all this toxicity in your marriage? You don't have any communication. You don't even know how to have a basic conversation. I'm trying to train you guys how to have a conversation with your son. You can't even converse with each other. So making
well.
sure your marriage is strong is going to be so key, because this will
Mm,
test you guys for sure.
hmm.
Some marriages are split over this issue, for
Oh,
sure.
yeah. Well, and then there's also some really tragic stories where you have the marriage is already severed, like divorced parents where you have a child who's questioning their gender. And then and sometimes I think estranged parents will do something just to get back at the parent, and it's not in the
Mm.
best interest of the child, so like
Oh
whether
yeah.
it's the mom or their dad is going to go along with the transition because they know that the other parent doesn't agree with it, so that's a way they can get some kind of revenge on the parent, and that is just really sad.
Yeah, and we're playing with fire with all this stuff because there's a lot of ways you can get revenge and so on, but this does permanent damage, and it's
Yeah, like
so it's
don't let the
scary.
kid be the way you're getting revenge on your ex.
Hmm. What else? I don't think we covered all the do's and don'ts, but or
There's
were there?
one that I skipped over, but do your due diligence. Don't rush to a professional. That kind of relates to the
Yeah, yeah,
first
we were
one
talking
about
about that
not
earlier.
panicking. Yeah. So, yeah, those are my six do's and
Yeah.
don'ts. There
No,
were
and I
more,
gotta
but I,
concur because as a therapist, I don't trust most other therapists. Uh, because like, I'm very selective. When someone asks me for a referral to another therapist, I'm like, I gotta do a lot of research.
yeah,
I don't trust most of my colleagues, especially when it comes to this issue.
yeah. No, you have to know the worldview, where they're coming from, what they believe. Yes, I agree with that.
For sure. So, tell me a little bit more about your ministry, what you currently do, because I know with Worthy Creations, you also do coaching. So,
Yes.
tell me a little bit more about how you're being a practical help to others who maybe are struggling with these areas.
Well, coming alongside people who have, needs around. I do have a counseling degree, but it's for pastoral counseling, a master's in counseling. I went to Palm Beach Atlantic, so I just want to say that I'm trained, have training in the you know, helping, and I've also many years of pastoral care support, offering pastoral care support, and but yes, coaching. And that could be somebody struggling with their gender identity, or like you said, parents, as well as people who are interested in help and support for unwanted same-sex attraction. So those are the kind of things that I work with. And also write. I write for the Institute for Faith and Culture. I write for them
Okay.
pretty regularly. I wrote this book, and we'll see what else. I was a journalist first many years ago, a newspaper correspondent, and so I love writing. And
Mm.
I also do stand-up comedy, which is a little different.
Yeah,
Doesn't
that was my
quite.
first exposure to you years ago, but do you still do it, or is
I
it on the
do,
back burner?
yeah. Well, there's been times where I haven't done much, but then lately I've just been like, I want to get back into that. So, and when I had that thought just not that long ago, a pastor reached out to me and he was doing some evangelism training seminars, and he said, I want my seminars to be fun, so I want a comedian. Would you come and do your comedy at my seminars? And so I started doing that. And yeah, so that's my art. That's my creative outlet.
I get that. I get it. Um, Give me a little, maybe a taste for people watching. What would coaching look like for if someone is struggling with gender identity issues and they were to see you for coaching? What would how would you approach the case? What would be a kind
Well,
of a plan?
it's a great question. And of course, there's not a one size fits all. But what I want to get to, if somebody's wanting to grow in their confidence in their biological reality. So I'll just say a woman who is wanting to feel more secure as a woman. Maybe
Mm,
she thought she was a boy. She tried to transition and then she said, okay, this isn't for me. I realize I'm making a terrible mistake. So I want to get to what it is like that made her think that. Let's see if we could figure out, was it messages she got in her home? Because I shared already from my story that there was domestic violence. And so that the message I got was that women are victims.
yeah.
Nobody told me that. I just experienced it and I watched it and I didn't want to be a victim. So, like, what's underlying that belief that you may be in the wrong body so that we can see if we can help shore it up and replace it with the truth, because it's probably a wrong belief. And then also going alongside them as they experiment with things. Like, I know for me, embracing my femaleness was scary for me.
Mm,
I and also just connecting with other women, in healthy relationship. I was terrified of straight women, and the reason is I felt like I had nothing in common with them.
mm,
Because I thought that, we were talking earlier about sports, we're talking about stereotypes earlier. Well, I was like, all they want to talk about is hair and makeup, and fashion. And I don't know anything about those things. Just like with many of the men I've worked with say, well, straight men, all they want to talk about is sports. Well, there's a
Yeah.
lot of straight men who are interested in sports, but to fit in with straight men doesn't mean you have to know anything about sports because there's straight men who don't care about that. They like movies or theater or the arts, like there's no one right way to be a man or a woman, just be you.
Yeah.
And so I want to help people have the confidence and the courage to step out and try things. And you try and see what works for you. Cause like, I try girly things and try to figure out where I'm at in that, and I mean, I used to think that God was going to make me give up sports and take up sewing in my journey to be more whole as a woman. And I realized that He doesn't want to demolish my personality in the process. I still love
Hmm.
sports, and it doesn't make me less female. So
Yeah.
in my coaching, I want to uh, just help people navigate that terrain so that they feel confident in the body God gave them, and they can begin to, whether that's struggling to build relationships with other women because I feel like I don't fit in. Like if you were a tomboy, is that okay? How do I fit in? How do I find my tribe? Or, because I always thought that, like I said, I was terrified of straight women, because I was also in the process of embracing my gender and my femaleness. I say and my, but it's because I've always used the word gender as synonymous with my biological sex, but
Yeah.
now that
As most
word
of
has
us
been,
did for up until a
yeah,
minute ago.
yeah. So, but actually, that word has been co-opted. So that's why I was trying to embrace my sex, my biological reality,
Hmm.
but and just feeling like I didn't fit in with other women because they looked so secure and confident. But it's interesting as I got to know these women, what I realized is that they were all insecure just like me. You could
Hmm.
tell the most beautiful woman and you could compliment something about her appearance, and so often she's going to say, dismiss the compliment. They don't say like, oh, thank you. They'll tell you what's wrong with them physically, like, oh, but
Yeah.
my hair or my nose or my shirt or my anything. And so I realized, oh, I fit in. I'm insecure about appearance and fashion and all that kind of stuff. So I want to just help people navigate that. It can,
That's like
because it can be scary.
one of the exercises I do with guys when they find themselves attracted to another guy is I walk them through what we call the three mindful tips.
Okay.
And it's just to pause before you react either like super positively or super negatively to the attraction. Either because I try to explain we're not taking a pro LGBT approach where if you feel the attractions, then you affirm that as what you are, nor are we taking an anti-LGBT approach where as soon as you feel the attractions, you have to like suppress the feelings and everything. We want to take a curious, mindful approach. And so one of the tips we give is when you find the attraction, you ask yourself, how do I feel about myself in comparison to this other guy?
Yeah.
And a lot of times it's more of a negative comparison. Like this guy's so ideal, he's this ideal guy, and I'm down here. I'm not man enough, not masculine enough, etc. And then we have them relax your body, do some deep breathing, whatever. So get out of that anxiety panic mode that you or the shame state that they might be in where they're kind of shut down and get back into being able to regulate. Then look at the guy again and think, huh, are there any things we might have in common? And a lot of guys, they start off with feeling like, well, I'm so insecure. He seems so confident. And one of the things I might ask them if they are having trouble identifying some ways they might have some things in common would be like, could you think, could it at least be reasonable to you that this guy might have some insecurities as well? Think he's ever felt a little insecure? Do you think maybe he's ever felt like he wasn't as good as some other guy? Maybe not like in the same way as you, but maybe some other guy he thought was better than him in some ways. And it's like a light goes on for them when they can recognize that, you know what, probably he has felt insecure in his own way. And that helps because the more they can see themselves as an equal with that guy, the less there's that attraction. Because the more they can realize this guy doesn't have anything that I need.
Yeah.
I have everything I need to be a man.
Yes.
So the
That's
same
so
thing applies
good.
with the
It's
female.
such a powerful exercise. Yes, I agree with that. I heard about things like that. And yeah, that's wonderful.
And so the other thing too is standing out is what you're sharing about the approach you take is dispelling the myths that are out there about the work we do. that says that, oh, your strategy, the conversion therapy approach, would be make the woman dress more feminine, make her wear pink, make her act in a more feminine manner, make her more passive, and it's like they think that what we do is like behavioral modification, and you make them conform to gender norms.
Yeah, to the
But
stereotype. Not at all. No,
yeah,
no.
no, we're
That
all
and
about no,
yeah.
embrace your personality traits
Yes.
and recognize that as an aspect of your masculinity, not counter to your masculinity or your femininity if you're a female, but notice the full spectrum of masculinity and femininity. I've been really helped by Larry Crabb's book, Fully
Oh,
Alive.
I'm not familiar with that book. Okay.
Oh, 2014. It's a great book. A biblical vision of gender that frees men and women to live beyond stereotypes. And he breaks masculinity and femininity down not to these sort of culturally defined traits, but rather as modes of relating,
Hmm.
as modes of giving and receiving, and just a matter of degrees, that there's masculine and feminine within each of us in some degree, but really the main task of the man is to enter in. And when you look at that, it's like when you break it down to that more of a way of relating to others, then that helps guys I work with see that, oh, I could be masculine even while I'm not doing stereotypically masculine things. So I don't have to be into sports or guns or cars to be a man. I, the way in which I relate masculinely is by being the one who initiates, um, and that can bear the burden with others. And even with femininity, because it's also important to know that there's overlap. Everyone sort of thinks men are the one who protect, uh, women aren't protectors. Like, no, no, women are protectors as well. There's just uniquely masculine and feminine ways of protecting. Like,
Sure.
women become the holding cell of protection. We have a mama bear as a trope for a reason. There's a way in which women can be fighters, but it's different from how man fights. And man will seek out and destroy. Women will be the ones who hold and then protect, and they'll fight back against threats that are encroaching. So women can be affirmed that no, there's a feminine way in which you are a fighter,
Mm.
a truth teller, a thinker, etc. It doesn't make you less feminine. When you can get into the way it's really more about how you relate to the other. That's it frees them to think beyond the culturally defined roles.
Yes, absolutely. I like that. That's awesome. I wasn't familiar with that book, so that's brilliant.
Oh, check it out. Yeah. Um, I think this is a really big problem is in the Western world. I think more so than other places because of how much we limit, at least with men, I think. 'Cause even in traditional cultures where they have very traditional gender roles in, say, even like the Middle East, it'd be very common to see men who are friends holding each other's hands as they're walking down the
Mm.
street.
Mm-hmm.
I got clients who are Egyptian and they live in the US, and sometimes they'll express like they wish they were back in Egypt because if they're with their buddies, they can still show affection and it won't be looked at as weird. They could
Okay.
lay their head against another guy as they're talking and it won't be looked at as gay because it's showing affection is just sort of part of what it means to be a man in some of those cultures. In Asia, like more like Korea and Ch Japan, it's okay for the man to not look like a huge like bulking
Arnold Schwarzenegger.
bodybuilder type.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So and to be maybe a little more quiet.
Petite. They're petite.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
So
we were talking about Cy Rogers earlier because you know that part of his ministry career, he lived in Asia for a number of years, and
yep.
he noticed that in America, people looked at him with contempt because they thought because people judged him for not being masculine enough because he
Yeah.
didn't live up to the kind of American model of masculinity, which is very narrow. And because if you're an athlete, you're already considered masculine, or if you're big and buff, you're masculine. So he was kind of a petite guy, and but he said he lived in Asia from I don't know in the 90s for almost I don't know 7 or 8 years. He lived in Singapore
Yeah.
doing this kind of ministry pioneering the work of sexual redemption over there. He said people did not look at me with the withering contempt that they did in America, because over there, to be masculine is to have self-control and to provide for your family. That was their metric for masculinity. It had nothing to do with how many women you slept with or how big your muscles are or how far you could throw a football. It was self-control and provision for your family.
Yep. Yeah. Bring it down to basics. That's so
Right.
important.
So yeah, we do have a Western mindset regarding masculinity and femininity, and it's not really helpful, because if you find yourself as atypical in your gender expression, then you feel like, oh, I don't measure up, and that's where kids can get the wrong message that maybe I'm in the wrong body.
Yep. It's so even though I don't like to take more of a sociological perspective to most things, this is one area where I do lean into it. But I'm like, if as a society we could change a bit, it would be to broaden our understanding of what masculinity and femininity are so that we don't get people
Excellent.
stuck in these rigid ways of thinking.
Excellent.
So,
Can I plug a video along those lines? Because I don't know if
sure.
you're familiar with my colleague, Dr. Julie Hamilton, but
Of course, yeah.
she produced a video that explains this and helps, therapists as well as other caregivers. So they could be pastors, youth workers, and it's genderidentity101.com. And
Yep.
she interviewed some of the leading experts on gender identity and how does this develop in a child, as well as she looked at several case studies. So she has 3 men and 3 women who struggled in their gender identity. I was one of the women she interviewed for this project, and it's just a free resource available online, genderidentity101.com. I just want to share that because we're
Oh
talking
yeah.
about stereotypes and what happens when you don't measure up, and the kind of suffering that results, not from not measuring up, but from the sometimes the alienation we feel like I don't have a sense of belonging with my peer group because I'm not typical as a female. And so she addresses that in that video.
Yep. Yeah. No, she had a kind of Zucker in there, and Chef Grossman. No, she definitely had Zucker. Yeah,
Yeah,
she did a good
Zucker
job on
and
that one.
Ken Zucker, and then the woman that worked with Dr. Zucker, I forget
That's
her
right.
name, she interviewed. Yes.
Yeah. No, yeah, a friend of mine as well. So we all run the same circles.
Yeah.
So,
Yes, for sure.
well, as we wind down here, I'm wondering if you could share an anecdote about Psy. Any fond memory that take us away with? I'd love to hear something.
Well, I have many memories. I worked with him, as you know, I worked with him for 20 years, and I miss him. He died in 2020 actually from cancer, so I miss him, but he was an amazing man. And I'll share the best advice I ever received from him. And it wasn't
Mm,
even personal to me, it's from his teachings. And that is not to keep secrets with Satan. So
mm,
you were talking about parents earlier and how they don't want to share what's going on in their family because of the shame they feel as parents, like they failed. But even like for somebody who struggled in some way, whether that's, I mentioned earlier, like whether it has to do with a porn addiction or any kind of struggle, a sin struggle, um, when we're not willing to be honest and get help and talk about it, we're keeping our confident then is Satan. Like that's the person we're confiding in, is because, and I'm not going to get I'm not going to find healing and wholeness if I can't be honest about whatever my struggle is. The Bible says in 1 John 1:9, if we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive us of our sins. So we have to be willing to confess it. And it doesn't mean you have to say it to everybody, and it doesn't mean you have to be a public spokesperson. But, the Bible talks about, coming and confession so that
mm.
you can pray for each other, you can be healed. Like that's
Yes.
part of our healing journey. So that's the best advice I ever received. As far as anecdotes, there's many. And I'm trying to think which one. Is there anything specific you're looking for?
I don't know. I can imagine something funny. I know he was a riot, so
He's
I.
super funny. Like when you he's kind of had a dark sense of humor too. So when you go into a new city and we're driving, and I wasn't always with him on the road, but I did get to accompany him sometimes because I would be the one who's handling the resource table for him. But
Mm.
he would always say, you look at a downtown skyline and he'd say, this will make fabulous ruins, someday. And yeah. I remember one time I told him, like, I'm really interested in, because I was in this season of trying to figure out what God had for me and what's next. So I said, I'm interested in, the sex trafficking industry. in terms of like helping people. And but before I just said I'm interested in that. And he goes, there's a lot of money in that. And I was like, no, that's not what I'm interested in. I'm interested in helping people who've been trafficked. So I'm trying to think. One of the funniest things was we were filming a seminar in Fort Lauderdale at a mega church, and it's one of the ones on your wall, actually, lessons learned. And there's a
Okay.
particular teaching in there called Renewing the Mind, where he's trying to show, like, he has a graphic of the brain, and he's showing like your brain cells, and it's a very like Mr. Sciencey type of talk. And so I made the PowerPoint for this. He was going to teach it, and so that night before, I stayed up with a friend and we made the PowerPoint. And it basically, you know the talk I'm talking about, where he
Hmm.
shows your button being pushed, and he shows like this thought process when your button is pushed, and how you're like, you suddenly your button's pushed and you feel insecure, you feel triggered, and you start to go down this thought process that leads you to like, I just want to go have sex with somebody.
Hmm.
And so it's like he jumps from brain cell to brain cell to brain cell to brain cell till it's the acting out thing. So I made and
Mm.
there's one slide for each time it jumps from each brain cell. It's just showing you, trying to show you biologically or neurologically what's happening in your brain. So he was seeing this. I made the slides the night before because he's like, I said, what are we going to do? We're going to show renewing the mind. But he said, I'll draw it on a whiteboard. And I said, I'm thinking, this is a mega church. You can't use a whiteboard. Nobody's going to be able to see what you're
Yeah.
drawing, because he would draw it. And he would just use the marker and do like that. And I made the slides, but I couldn't remember how many. He goes from the triggering event to like this brain cell to how many times I skipped to the next one. The last one says sex, right? So I couldn't remember, like, because it's a sequence. Well, so we're in the sound booth and he's seeing the slides for the first time. And he said, listen, like, it's right before he's going on. So he goes, listen, I'm going to follow you. Like, you just, so we get the right number of the thought process. It's just too long of a setup for this story, but I realized, but I thought it was
It's okay.
super funny, because what happens is he said, because we're trying to get to the one where I was triggered, I want to have sex. Okay.
Yeah.
And that can happen in a second like that. But if you slow it down in real time, you're going through all this thought process. So he said,
Yeah.
you lead me, you advance the slide, then I'll say the next sequence and I said to him, well, do you want me to wait for sex? And as soon as I said it, I mean, I realized we're in the sound booth. There's another guy listening. And I thought, what do we sound like right now? But in that line of work, we
You
would,
gotta have a sense of humor in this field.
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
oh my gosh. People, when they hang out with me for real, like they hear how dark my humor is, and they're like, and you work with people with these issues? I'm like, I have to. Like, I'm an artist, so like my outlet is when I get together with my cartoonist friends and we do caricatures and we do
Oh, okay.
we do comic jams where just someone starts it. I'm the one who, oh gosh, I'm telling on myself here. I'm the one who will take it blue. And, and yet I'm in ministry doing this type of work, but it's like my outlet in a lot of
It's sexual
ways.
redemption, man. The first time I ever met with the video editor that I hired to produce one of the series, there was a new editor I was using. And I called him up and I said I had gotten a referral for this guy. He worked at PBS for a while with my friend's husband. So she said he might be willing to take this job. And I said, okay. And it was another Cy Rogers series. So I called him up. I said, I have a project on sexual redemption. I said, I'm looking for a video editor. And he goes, okay. He's like, what is that? Like, what is sexual redemption? And so we made an appointment for us to meet, and so him to see some of the footage to decide if he's going to work with me or not. So I popped in something called Cy in the Hot Seat, which I don't know if you know what that is, but it's a Q&A where Cy
Yeah.
is answering the questions that the audiences wrote down. Well, I didn't think it through. So we popped this video in, and I mean, this is a guy I just met, and we're watching, and the first question on there was, is oral sex wrong? And I was like sitting there going, I'm just not saying a word. Like, and then Cy answered the question. It took a couple minutes, he's a great answer. And I was just sitting there thinking, only in my line of work could I meet a guy and we're watching another guy talk about oral sex. But but the video editor loved his answer, immediately was like, this guy is great. Yeah, I want to work with you. So it was great, but there was a little moment there. I was like, it's
I have no filter for that stuff. Like I'll be with a buddy or like an accountability partner or someone who he's a friend who also confides in me, and we'll meet at, like a restaurant or something,
Yeah.
and we'll be talking about this stuff, and he'll be like all quiet, he's like in hushed tones, and I'm just like out there, oh my gosh, oh, I'm just talking about sex like it's nothing, like out there in
Yeah.
public,
Right.
and
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, I'm sorry, yeah, I'll try to keep it down for you.
Yes.
I'm
Yeah.
all nervous.
Because when you've been in this field for so long and you talk about it because you're trying to encourage people and help people, we don't have the same ick factor that people who are
No.
not used to talking about these things.
Yeah, one of the piece of advice my one of my clinical supervisors gave me when I was in grad school is as a therapist, you need to be the most comfortable person in the room. I
That's
need to be able
good.
to hear anything. And so I've got that way. I've heard un, unspeakable stories. So like
Yeah.
I'm way too
Yeah.
comfortable with this stuff now. But you mentioned earlier like what's in the future as you sort of said that a moment ago with some things. So uh, what is it ahead for you? What anything else coming down the pike? You know, you mentioned to me starting up your own podcast at some point soon. Did it
Yes,
already launch or what?
yeah, I'm starting a podcast. I'm going to be talking about faith and mental health and everything in between. And I mean, I started recording already.
Okay.
So I'm not ready to launch yet because I need to get some shows, recorded and edited and all that before we launch so that, once we launch, then it's like I'm hoping for once a week to be able to release a new episode. So I need episodes, they say in the can, I think is the
Yep.
right phrase.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't have a launch date, but I'm just enjoying the process of interviewing people because mine is not just on sexuality.
Hmm.
I interviewed somebody the other day who she had a gambling addiction and that led her into recovery. And now she ministers to others in recovery, like not AA because it was a gambling. She went to
Hmm.
Gambling Anonymous or whatever, but she, just her story has led her to, they call them the rooms, like the
Oh
recovery
yeah, yeah.
rooms. Yeah.
Yep.
And that's her ministry is to come alongside other women who are struggling, whether that's Narcotics Anonymous or whatever their struggle is. And let's see, I interviewed a guy who he was doing his PhD research in clinical psychology on narcissism. So that was fun to get to talk about, narcissism and you know the what it is and how it's healed and things like that. And it's just different people, different stories, and what are the
Yeah.
obstacles to healing, and also what are their takeaways that could be imparted to the audience for whatever they're dealing with. So that's something I'm excited about right now.
You got a name for it? Like
I'm
what?
still working on a name.
Okay.
So, I said that it's about faith and mental health and everything in between. And I looked up things like the in between. I want a name that's unique, that's not taken yet.
Mm-hmm.
I started playing around with the word liminal, which is about we're not where we used to be, and we're in the middle. We're in.
Yeah.
I don't want to say in transition because especially talking about the gender issue, but we're moving.
Yeah, we're in the
And
here or not yet. Yep.
I was playing around with the word liminal, like liminal vibes.
Hmm.
But a lot of people don't know it. When I said that to somebody, she thought I was talking about lemons. And I'm like, no, I'm not talking about.
Yeah, yeah. Liminal is not very well known phrase yet, but yeah, I
Yeah.
get that.
So I was like, so I'm still playing around. I thought about like redeemed mind or redeemed minds.
Hmm.
So I'm just still figuring that out. I wish I had my name, but I don't have it figured out yet.
Well, let us know what it is when you figure it out, so I'll add it to the description even if it's after we post this, so
Okay,
that way we
sure.
can
That'd be
update it
great.
and people can find you. Well, any other things you want to plug? If people want to reach out to you, find more about your ministry, what would they go to?
Worthycreations.org, which is the ministry, and they can find out more information about coaching. And my book is there as well as it's on Amazon. So, I always want people to buy it on Amazon and leave me a review.
Yeah. Hold
That's
it up
what I
one more
want to
time
plug.
so everyone can see it one more time.
Oh, okay, sure. Answers to Gender Madness.
Answers to Gender Madness. So thanks for running it. It is very easy to follow. I do appreciate the writing style in it. It's very
I should probably
approachable.
put it way up front. There it
There you
is.
go. Boom.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a
yeah,
good one.
yeah.
So
And
definitely check it out.
show off my nails,
It goes with the book. All the same
right?
color as the queue.
Yes.
Well, Christine, thank you so much. We've been talking for months trying to get a scheduled time together. So I'm glad to finally meet you. and get this interview in. And just thank you so much for the work you've done and being a faithful servant over these many years. And
Thank you.
I really, I always want to promote those who have proved themselves over time. And so you're one of them. So I
Uh,
appreciate you being on here,
that's an honor. Thank you. So appreciate your time too. So thank you for the conversation.
of course. To everyone else, as I always say at the end, please remember that Jesus loves you freely, fully, faithfully, and fruitfully. Take care.